Welcome back. So what we've talked about so far is looking at intervening variables, understanding that this particular research done by Tolman and Hanzik in 1930 demonstrated the idea that there needs to be something in between the independent variable and the dependent variable, something that we simply can't ignore. And this thing that's in between it, this intervening variable, is learning. So theoretically, an internal state of learning intervened between the independent variable and the dependent variable. It was this state that caused errors to decrease, not the practice trials. So again, we're getting further away from the idea of what the behaviorists thought was learning, with some sort of mechanistic behavioral pattern that must be there, and totally ignoring what must be going on inside the. So intervening variables are studied by means of operational definitions, which are descriptions of procedures that are assumed to have some link to the internal state. So the operational definition, practice trials, that's going to be the independent variable. The operational definition of the dependent variable is going to be the amount of errors that's created. And the intervening variable between those two is going to be our learning. So another idea is mental representation, an internal state of an organism that reflects or mirrors actual or possible states of affairs in the external world. So again, what we're seeing here is something that is very subjective in nature, something that we cannot objectively examine. The notion that when we observe something, for example, in the real external world, there is something inside the organism, an internal state that reflects or mirrors that actual thing out in the real world. Tolman described this mental representation as a cognitive map, where we have the sensory input, okay, and with that, inside of us, we have representations of it. Such types of things could fall into the form of abstract forms, local features such as colors or line and orientations. They can be embellished, transformed into abstract information and representations. So the notion here is that these things that we are representing mentally, they have some sort of reality in the real world. But we can do things to them when they're inside of us, when they're mental representations. For example, we see the figure ground thing here of the V's and faces. So we can go back to seeing faces or seeing a vase. We're transforming this type of thing inside through mental representation. They can also interfere with us as well. We can rotate them in our mind, okay, like playing the old game of Tetris. But we also can see how they can interfere with us. For example, the Stroop task. Name the color in which the word is printed. That is, don't read the word, just say the color. Red. Okay, we would say red here, but actually it's like and so on. So the mental representations is we see lines, we can see textures, we can embellish the things that we see, we can transform them by going back and forth like in the figure ground, we can rotate them, and we also can see interference in our mental representations. So when we see red and the color red, that makes sense for us, but we sort of hesitate when we see the color in the word being in conflict with each other. They tend to interfere. So mental representations, we know that they exist because they exist within our own subjective experience. So again, these are things that behaviors cannot really explain, but mental representation, the idea of cognition and cognitive aspects of things, well, of course, it makes sense. They should, and they do exist. So some of the earlier influences, history and contributions. Throughout psychology's history, human cognitive abilities have been studied philosophically and later experimentally. Contribution of J.S. Mill, Frederick Charles Bartlett, and Fechner, Ebbinghaus, James and others have discussed and have been discussed in this course that really show that we have always had some interest in cognitive abilities, our cognitive capabilities. Jean Piaget, again, he did extensive work on trying to understand how it is that we develop cognitively, that we do not think like adults when we're children. We have to develop those skill sets and those abilities. So Jean Piaget demonstrated that a child's interaction with their environments become more complex and adaptive as its cognitive structure becomes more articulated through maturation and experience. His work in cognitive development between the 30s and 40s contributed to the revived interest in cognitive issues in the 50s. Cybernetics is the study of the structure and function of information processing systems. We see that this, in Shannon Weaver, began what is known as information theory. And this, again, talks about things that we cannot really see. They're not really objective. These are things that go on in the world of the mind. Okay, so this information theory, which notes the various transformations of information and how it undergoes these transformations and enters into our communication system and operates within that system. So we see now not only that we moved away from behaviorists being the driving force of psychology, but we're opening it up to other areas in cognition and developing theories to help explain what's going on inside the mind that, is define the objective nature that the behaviorist had. So developments around the 1950s as well. Noam Chomsky, he argues that the human brain is genetically programmed to generate language. Each child is born with a brain structures that make it relatively easy to learn the rules of language. The language acquisition device exists, he says, because environmental stimulation alone cannot account for the speed and proficiency in which children acquire language. So, beginnings of people in contemporary cognitive psychology, we saw George Miller looking at memory, for example. We see that he was very much interested in what the capacity of our memory was. Continued to move the interest in cognitive psychology along with others and other contributions as well. Lashley and Hebb continue to discuss physiology and behavioral phenomena in cognitive processes. Leon Festinger noted the ideas that one may have might be compatible with or incompatible with another. When ideas are incompatible, a state of cognitive dissonance exists that motivates a person to change behaviors and beliefs. This goes back to social psychology to a large extent as well. The idea is when you have opposing ideas or attitudes with your behavior, they're come in conflict. There's something that needs to change. It causes a discomfort in you, a dissonance, and you need to align your behavior and your attitudes together. And of course, we know that oftentimes when that does occur, we'll change our attitudes to be in line with the behavior that we're demonstrating. And the key point here is that his description of this change made no reference to behavioristic ideas at all. So a key aspect of who we are as humans and what we do can be described without having behavioristic terms being utilized. Hebb, his APA presidential address, urged the use of scientific rigor of the behavioral researchers to study cognitive processes. He noted the work of Festinger and Miller and so on. He was also encouraged by the possibility of using computer models for studying cognitive processes. And you would imagine in the 1950s, computer was very cutting edge. It was not something that we saw in the public domain or in the public consciousness yet. But again, the notion of this was something that really excited people as well. So we saw the cognitive revolution. We saw with Ulrich Nasir looking and developing this idea of cognitive psychology. We saw Bandura with his social cognitive theory began its early development and is still a popular theory in use today. Now we talk about one other outgrowth of this. As we started to understand our cognition and our intelligence, we started to say, well, can we create this intelligence in other things? So the definition of artificial intelligence, a special branch of computer science that investigates the extent to which the mental powers of human beings can be captured by means of machines. So, now let's revisit Alan Turing and the Turing test. He raised the question about the developed a test of whether or not machines think. So the question is, well, we need to be able to say, is this machine thinking like a human being? So Turing came up and his thought processes and thought experiments a way to try to determine if a machine can think like a human. Other researchers have suggested the concepts of weak artificial intelligence and strong artificial intelligence. So let's clarify what that is. Weak AI claim that at best, computers can only simulate human mental attributes, that they're really not thinking or pondering ideas or coming up with their own ideas. They only seem to be doing that. Proponents of strong AI claim that the computer, when appropriately programmed, really is a mind capable of understanding and having mental states. The belief here is if you are able to have strong AI, you're able to program a computer to have strong AI, that the mental states that we experience as human beings could also be experienced by that artificial intelligence. So let's go back to one of the individuals who started the conversation for us in the ideas of mind. Way back in a previous chapter, we started the unit called Philosophy of Mind. And it was Rene Descartes, who sort of started off that whole conversation for us at that time. And we remember that Descartes, anything that we refer to as Cartesian, that is a reference to Descartes' ideas. So the Cartesian challenge, and this is what he had wrote many, many years ago. If there were machines which bore a resemblance to our bodies and imitated our actions as closely as possible for all practical purposes, we should still have two very certain means of recognizing that they were not real men. The first is they could never use words or put together signs as we do in order to declare our thoughts to others. Secondly, even though some machines might do some things as well as we do them, or perhaps even better, they would inevitably fall or fail in others, which would reveal that they were acting not from understanding but only from the disposition of their organs or programming, for example. Hence, it is for all practical purposes impossible for a machine to have enough different organs or ideas or programs to make it act in all contingencies of life and the way in which our reason makes us act. So those were Descartes' ideas. His challenge to the notion of could we create some machine that could actually think. So looking at this very specifically, following up on his mechanistic views, we should still have two very certain means of recognizing that they were not real men. So the idea is that we would always be able to see that they're not real. They could never use words or put together signs as we do in order to declare our thoughts to others, to be able to have a true conversation and convey meaning. Some machines might do some things as well as we do, but they would ultimately fail in some manner, that they would get glitched up. So for all practical purposes, impossible for a machine to act in all contingencies of life and the way which our reason makes us act. So basically sort of an argument against this idea of the thinking machine. So the Turing test, can a machine meet the Cartesian challenge? Use language in a way that humans do rather than merely uttering sounds. Exhibit the complexity and flexibility of behavior in a wide range of human areas as humans do. That was the idea. So go back again to something I referred to previously in a previous session. You answer the phone. Someone's talking to you. It takes you a while to realize that it's not a live human being on the other end. Maybe they are answering questions that you pose to them and sending questions back to you that you then answer. So we do get fooled to some degree when we answer that phone that rings in the middle of the evening. But sooner or later, we normally figure out that they are not a live human being. There's some program, of software that's having this ability to sound rather human, or sound like a human voice. So, what, if anything, of philosophic interest would it show if a machine could pass the Turing test? Somewhat debatable, but the idea here is passing the test necessary for intelligence. Is passing the test sufficient? What is a machine? Aren't our brains themselves machines? In a way, we would have to say that yes, we have some mechanistic qualities of our brains. But obviously, we still don't know what makes us conscious. Not yet, not fully. We don't understand it. So the Turing test is basically that test that basically describes this scenario about conversation again. Basically what Descartes proposed some time ago, that having a conversation is one way to have some demonstration of one's intelligence. So it gives us new light to the idea of having an intelligent conversation. The notion is you are demonstrating your intelligence when you are having a conversation. So, the Turing test. Functionalism, again, an idea that we've discussed several times before. Mental states are to be characterized in terms of their causal relationships to sensory inputs, behavioral outputs, and other mental states. That is, in terms of their functional role. So our intelligence serves a role. It is functional. It allows us to live. It allows us to be able to have careers, jobs, occupations, to make money, to survive as a species. So a Turing machine can do this. So if functionalism is true, a machine should in principle be able to do anything a person can do. Can a machine do whatever a person can do? And can it meet that challenge? Now, obviously, you can go online and find out what results are of Turing tests. But we know, and I can recall off the top of my head, that there have been times where people can sort of not know for certain if they are interacting with a machine. Go back to the little scenario I described to you earlier when you pick up the phone in the middle of the evening and you start talking with somebody on the other end. And you may believe at one point as you have this conversation, they fooled you for a bit. They are a machine, but they sounded human. So again, the Turing test was just this Alan Turing's idea about how it is that we can try to have some metric, some measure to identify something that is not human but may have some degree of intelligence. So the Turing test really is this. You have a conversation with two people, a moderator and two people you're having a conversation with, and one of them is not a human being. Can you tell the difference? That's basically in essence what the Turing test is. If the general idea it was this, if you can be fooled, then they have demonstrated some degree of intelligence in their ability to converse with you, a real life human being. So, another thing too that we probably are aware of, and you've probably come across a couple of times already, what can people do that computers can't do? And we have this thing called CAPTCHA, telling humans and computers apart automatically, or CAPTCHA, a completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart. It is a program that protects websites against bots. Bots are algorithms and program structures that exist that can send requests to websites. But it's not a human doing it. It's a program that continually sends requests to the websites. And by doing this, it can overtax the website and crash it. So in order to avoid this from happening, we have this CAPTCHA here, a program that protects websites against bots by generating and grading tests that humans can pass, but current computer programs cannot. For example, humans can read the distorted text as the one shown below, but current computer programs can't. So we see this the wavy lines that says overlooked with a line through it, or inquiry that's wavy too with a line through it. Computers cannot detect that, but we can. So the term CAPTCHA was coined in 2000 by Louis Van Ahn and Manuel Bloom and Nicholas Hopper and John Langford of Carnegie Mellon University to describe this process. And a lot of websites, particularly websites that will deal with financial matters like a banking system, they will give you tests of some sort that only humans can perform and computers and artificial intelligence cannot. So this imitation game, the purpose of the game in which we have a person, a machine, and an interrogator separated from the other person and the machine, the object of the game, as I was describing to you earlier, is for the interrogator to determine which of the two is the person and which is the machine. Now, we've talked about how we would be able to prove or get support for the idea that something is artificially intelligent. There are arguments that we previewed earlier that are against it. Serial argument against strong AI. Serial distinguishes between the syntax, manipulation of symbols according to specified rules in semantics, assignments of meaning to symbols. He stated that the computer programs have syntax, not semantics. Do this, do that, go to, add this, subtract this, multiply this, do this computation. Human thought, however, has intentionality, but computers do not. So humans have meaning. They have not only semantics, they understand the meaning of things. They also have intentionality, whereas programs follow whatever has been set out for them. And so the idea is, can we really truly have any strong AI if we can only follow our syntax, that we only can do what is there for us to do? Human thought, however, again, is intentional, okay, and it has understanding. And Cyril basically says we do not. So Cyril proposed this idea of the Chinese room argument, a thought experiment from John Cyril. It is one best known and widely credited counter to the claims of artificial intelligence, that it claims that computers do or at least can someday think. Machines don't think, they simulate thinking. No matter how good the simulation may be, it is merely a simulation. So in summary, the Chinese room argument goes something like this. The Chinese room argument holds that a digital computer executing a program cannot be shown to have a mind, cannot be shown to have understanding or consciousness. Regardless of how intelligently or human-like the program may make the computer behave, the centerpiece of the argument is that the experiment known as the Chinese room demonstrates that the syntax is what we see here, not semantics, not understanding. Now, there is a video that you should watch about the Chinese room argument. Please do so, and this will become even more clear to you. But the basic premise is this. We can follow all the instructions in the world, and we can seemingly have a conversation in a language that we do not know nor understand. But simply because we're following the syntax does not mean that we are intelligent. We don't have understanding. And so what he's communicating here and suggesting is that for humans, the idea of understanding, the semantics of it, that's really what differs in us. That's our consciousness. We have this understanding of things, something that a computer, no matter how sophisticated it may be, never can have. So, are humans machines? The question reintroduces an important questions into modern times, such as what is the nature of human nature? This type of question posed in relation to machines brings into play many issues such as the mind-body question and the lawfulness of human behavior and free will, things that we have touched on several times already in this course. So all of this sort of sets the stage, moving away from the behaviorist views, starting to look at like McDougall did and like Tolman did, starting to reinvest time and interest as psychologists into things cognitive. And then understanding as the information theory came up and computers came into play, saying can we program artificial intelligence into a non-human entity? So now this sets the stage for this new science, this cognitive science. And cognitive science uses an approach. It uses the computer as a model for human information processing. So obviously the cognitive science as we see it today had to come about around the time that computers were being used, because it uses the computer as a model for human information processing. It follows a rationalist tradition. It has a strong nativistic type of component to it. So, faculty psychology, information processing marks a return to faculty psychology, as does the recent discovery that brain is organized into many modules or groups of cells, each associated with a specific function. So, we return to the mind-body problem again. Radical behaviorists deny the existence of the mind, but cognitive psychology assumes the existence of the mind. So we're back to assuming, in a sense, the mind is something real. Remember, the hardcore behaviorists like John Watson and those guys, they didn't want to do things that were not objective, things that we could see directly and quantify. Now we're back to the idea of the mind having existence. In each case, bodily events and cognitive events are assumed here in cognitive science. Therefore, the relationship between the two must be explained. So, cognitive science in the 1970s, information processing psychologists combined efforts with philosophers, anthropologists, linguists, and neuroscientists, engineers, and computer scientists to create the area of cognitive science in the 1970s. We'll end there for now.